presented by Page Wizard Games, Learning and Entertainment. It's that time, everybody. Time for more entertainment and fun with your favorite computer scientist, Dr. Daniel Page. Welcome to Dan Plays, where Dan has fun with friends and we talk about all sorts of fun things, including computer science and everything under the sun. No barriers, just fun. Check out all the fun rewards and supporter access at the links. That's enough for now. Let's get started. Come on, Dan. Let's get started.
Hello everybody! I hope everyone's having a beautiful day. I want to welcome you onto the stream for our lecture today. So before we get started, which today's topic will be on cryptography, we're going to be doing an introduction. So the goal of today's lecture will be to introduce you to core concepts of cryptography, and we'll also talk about some key concepts associated with this in relation to kind of the big picture, just a big picture look of cryptography. And we'll see a basic cipher just to illustrate these concepts, so that when you finish watching this lecture or engaging with the lecture here, you'll have something you can play around with your friends. Okay, so that's going to be the general goal here today. A couple of quick things before we get started. If you want access to the notes from today's lecture, sorry, I bumped it a little too much. If you want access to today's notes for today's lecture, you can find them on patreon.com/pagewizard later today. Hello, Miss Kitty. You're going to help me here today. Yes, you are. Yes, you're going to behave yourself, though. Yeah, you're going to behave yourself, or else you get the hose, aka the spray bottle. But yeah, so if you want access to the notes, which include the examples that I'll talk about and some other things as well, along with the other lessons, they'll be available at patreon.com/pagewizard. Also subscribe star as well. You can find all the links on social media, or the links are below, depending on where you're watching this. Another thing, I have a survey going around of just looking for general availability. So I want to help calibrate my live programming to those that are watching. So please, if you haven't filled it out, it just takes 1 or 2 minutes just to fill in your availability. I also have some space there for suggestions about what you like about what we're doing, and also topics you might be interested in. So far I've gotten some pretty neat suggestions that I most certainly will touch upon, such as context-free languages, Turing machines, and randomized algorithms. Those are a few I got suggestions for. Those are all great suggestions, by the way. In addition, I'll be branching out a few other series and revisiting a few others, so I got some more technology for doing that. For example, we're going to be doing, coming back to our programming series. I got a nice lecture in that I can put into the scene here. That'll make it a little bit more interactive, as opposed to me having to hop back and forth, back and forth. It'll make things much easier. So, anyways, that's all the main stuff I had to say, but if you're enjoying watching this, please tell your friends to come join the fun, and of course, consider subscribing or following. Right, Miss Kitty? Miss Kitty agrees, I think. I think she's thinking the same thing. But Miss Kitty, we're going to be talking about cryptography. So actually, let me put the chat up. One other thing I need to make a quick remark about is whenever the chat is on screen, do keep in mind that I can see it regardless. Miss Kitty, those are my notes. You have to get on Patreon for those. You have to get on Patreon. Miss Kitty, oh, don't fall down, my little friend. Don't fall down. So, just a couple quick things. So, in between the major segments of today's lecture, I'll put the chat up. This will be acting as a short intermission between the chunks of the lecture, where you can ask much lengthier questions. But if you have a question or if you have anything to say, just put in the chat. Keep in mind that I can hear the chat and I also can visually see it. It's right there, if you're wondering where it is. So if you're wondering where you are in this room here, you're right there. You're right there. So keep in mind, just because you can't see the chat or hear the chat doesn't mean I can't see or hear the chat. So just please keep that in mind. Have a good time in the chat. Talk about all sorts of things. Tell me about how your day is going. I hope you're having an amazing day. And other than that, please contribute. A lecture on its own, I argue, isn't as good as a much more sweeping one for which we get more people involved.
I want to offer promotion of your channel, viewers, followers, views, chat bots. The price is lower than any competitor. The quality is guaranteed to be the best. Auto on.
That's a pretty epic spam there. I just love how I say that, and it's amazing. Amazing timing on that. I love it. I love it. I love it. But anyways, you heard the demonstration. When the text is up, you can hear it on the stream, but do keep in mind, I still hear it regardless. So that's mainly for those that maybe have difficulties communicating in a written fashion. You want to hear it orally. Just keep in mind that that only happens when the chat is on screen. Otherwise, I will address questions as they come, though. So keep in mind if you have a question. If it's something I can address on the fly, I'll address it on the fly. Otherwise, I'll hold off till the intermission to deal with it in a much more delicate manner. Because some of these things, they're really difficult to just talk about on the fly at that one spot. They might need a full worked out example, for instance. I was about to say for example, but then that's just a little too much. So anyways, Miss Kitty, we're going to be talking about cryptography today. Are you excited, Miss Kitty? She's quite excited about all of this. She is. Yes. I think we've got through everything we need to do. I have my checklist in my head. I'm pretty sure I touched upon everything. But just remember, if you want access to the materials afterwards, I'll have them available at Patreon at the supporter access tier and above, which is only $5 a month, which is crazy. It's crazy, it's crazy amazing. But anyways, let's get into things. Miss Kitty. I don't. Miss Kitty's gonna help us in a bit, but I don't need your help right now, okay? So why don't we go down just for a little bit, and then you can come back, okay? Okay, come on, little friend. Come on, little friend. Let's go down, just for now. You'll be back in a few minutes. So today we're going to be talking about a topic called cryptography. Now, I'll be providing a brief introduction to this topic, which is quite a broad topic, just to be very clear. So I want to give us a little summary about what cryptography is, and then we're going to talk about some core terminology in relation to the things that we're going to be studying here. So let's do that here. So let's first talk about what is cryptography. So cryptography is the study, I was about to get right to the chase. It's the study of, oh, here comes that M word, mayonnaise, okay. The mathematical techniques related. And I must stress that this is just a brief description. I must stress that we can go into all sorts of niches into this topic. Techniques related to information security. For instance, that's one way you could think about it. Security. Such as, and there's different aspects to this, such as confidentiality. This is one that we'll mostly focus on. Confidentiality. Data integrity. For those that aren't sure what I mean by this, what I'm saying is, I haven't forgotten, Miss Katie, don't worry. Ensuring that no one is allowed to change the data. So if you have data and you want to make sure that it doesn't get compromised, that's what I'm referring to. There's different aspects to such things. So we can talk about protocols that are put in place to ensure no data has been changed. This might also include authentication, which is another big aspect of cryptography. Authentication. So, authentication in the sense of data, this could just be simply the idea that of who you're talking to, authenticating that. So, namely, we will be interested in the study of techniques for so-called secure communication, for secure communication. So this will include things like protocols and more over an insecure communication channel, which I'll talk more about that in a moment. You can't just throw a term like this out there and be like, okay, whatever, you just go along with it. No, I'll go into more detail about what I mean by communication channel and what it means to be insecure. Where an agent may be interested in what we are communicating. So perhaps that might include more things, whether it be malicious or not. So, that being said, this is kind of a broad idea of what cryptography is. So it could be incredibly, well, here's that M word, it could be incredibly mathematical, a lot of number theoretic stuff, all the way to talking about algorithms, to all the way to talk about more systems level management. So it could be all over the place in terms of discussion when it comes to cryptography. It has its little claws in all sorts of different areas. That's the point I'm getting at. But we'll be focusing in on the study of techniques for secure communication over an insecure communication channel, which is a standard model for cryptography. So let's go through some basic terminology. Miss Kitty's going to help me talk about this. So let's do some basic terminology. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is something called a plain text. Sometimes this is also referred to as clear text, as in the clear. So you're going to imagine you have this communication that's happening over this channel where I have some message I would like to send over the channel to someone else. So the message in question I refer to as the plain text. The message M, or data to be encoded or sent. So often I'll use lowercase letters to indicate that I'm referring to plain text versus another. So when I send it over this channel, I would like to be able to do something to protect it from other people interested in what I'm sending. I would like to have some form of security. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but whenever I have the message in question, M, I'm always going to write it with lowercase letters, but this is just me trying to be clear with the way I'm communicating the messages, but it doesn't have to be like that. Just be very clear. So what do we do with plain text? Well, we encipher or encrypt it. So encipher or encrypt. So what does this mean in plain language? To make plain text ideally, so I'm just going to put ideally in there just to ideally unintelligible intelligible except to its intended recipients or recipient. So I have this plain text. I want to send it over this communication channel. What I could do is I could encrypt the plain text. And what I get as a result is what we refer to as ciphertext. So this is just simply the message. The message after the encryption or encryption. So I'll write this in uppercase letters, but just to be very clear, often when I talk about how I encrypt, I need a cipher or cryptosystem. That's what we use to encrypt. So I'll refer to this as a cipher or cryptosystem, which will define what a cryptosystem is in a moment. So this is a particular method of encryption. And I must stress that depending on how technically you're going to get with what we refer to as a cipher or a cryptosystem, typically this might refer to the encryption or decryption algorithms. So the decryption naturally takes the encrypted text, the ciphertext, and brings you back to plain text. We'll talk about that in a moment, but often cryptosystem may also entail what the keys and how they get distributed also might be as well. For us, this will be relatively simple in today's lecture, but there can be more details to the cryptosystem. A particular method of encryption. So suppose if I were to give it a name, say I could call it capital EK, where K is its key. Where K is the key. So what exactly and how do we exactly consider if something is secure or not? Well, one way we can go about trying to do something like that is through something called cryptanalysis or cryptanalysis. So, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head here, one small detail. Yeah. We're going to go through cryptanalysis. So, one way you can go about assessing the security of a cryptosystem is through cryptanalysis. So what is this? So what's the game when you're dealing with cryptanalysis like this? So this is the process where the receiver of the ciphertext which, what would it be? It would be the result of applying the cryptosystem with key K to message M. So this is the process where the receiver of the ciphertext determines M. So I'm just going to abbreviate determines with deter with a. It determines M without prior knowledge of K. So without knowing the key. So often the goal here is to try to find out what the plain text is, but more importantly, the key. So if somebody is using this key to encrypt messages in the plain text, if you can get the hold of that key, presuming that this person is using this specific key all the time or frequently, this could create a vulnerability in such a cryptosystem, making it not as secure. It has poor security, potentially. So this is one way you might go about doing this, is by performing cryptanalysis. So let's put this all together. I'm going to be needing to define a little bit more carefully what a cryptosystem is, or cipher. Now, before I do this, I just want to illustrate these main concepts here, and then we're going to see how they formalize. And then we'll see how that all comes together when we start talking about what a communication channel is. I need help from Miss Kitty, though. So what I want to imagine is imagine I have this box, and this is where I want to put my message. And imagine there's a communication channel here. Some way to take and transmit the message from here. My message is going to go right here. I would like to put it in that box. So one way I could try to protect it from vulnerabilities, as in someone stooping in on the messages to find out what they're saying, is I can use a cipher to encrypt the message. So imagine I wanted to take my message. My message is in fact Miss Kitty. I'm going to take Miss Kitty and put her in the box, because you know kitties love going in boxes. So imagine my message M is Miss Kitty. So I have Miss Kitty is my message. So Miss Kitty's going to go in the box. I'm going to encrypt Miss Kitty. And then I'm going to take Miss Kitty, the message, I'm going to transmit it to the desired destination, for which I can decrypt it, and I get back my message. And then I have Miss Kitty in the box, and she's awfully happy over there. So the idea is that I give you plain text, so I want to use my cipher to encrypt that, or encipher it. I get ciphertext. The box here, when I transmit it, when she's inside it, that's my ciphertext. And I send that over to where it needs to go, across the channel, for which it can be decrypted. So that's the process of taking ciphertext and returning it back to being plain text, using the known key that both parties agree on. Again, I'll go into more detail about this. And of course, if ever someone wanted to find out that I sent Miss Kitty, they might go through a process of cryptanalysis. So specifically, they would want to know how I put Miss Kitty in this box, and how, and specifically what key I use. So for example, if I were to put a lock on the box, I wouldn't do that because Miss Kitty's in here, right? But I don't know, she isn't calling for it today. But suppose that I did have a key for it, then that would also be a rather important piece of information, depending on what cipher we're talking about. But yeah, so these are the main concepts here. Now I'm going to define what a cryptosystem is. So thank you, Miss Kitty. Let's put you right here. There you go, Miss Kitty. There you go. So let's formalize what we just discussed here. So I'm going to be adopting a definition that is fairly common for what a cryptosystem is. And I must stress that when somebody refers to a cipher, very often they're referring to the algorithms, rules, or methods for which you use to convert for encryption and decryption. The process of me putting Miss Kitty in the box and taking her out of the box. So, let's define what a cryptosystem is. So a cryptosystem is a quintuple, so it's a 5-tuple. It's going to have fancy P, fancy C, fancy K. That's supposed to be fancy. A fancy E, and a fancy D. Where, let's define each one of these aspects. So fancy P is a finite set, consisting of possible plaintext. Of possible plaintext. Naturally, C would be a finite set as well, right? A finite set of possible ciphertext. Now, fancy K, this is going to be what we're going to refer to as the key space. Fancy K is called the key space. The key space. A finite set of possible keys. So these are all the possible keys that can be used for encryption and decryption. Finite set of possible keys. And now I gotta talk about those last two over there. So we're gonna have to be a bit careful about this. I'm going to need it so that there exists keys over this key space, and I'm going to define encryption and decryption in relation to each one of these keys. So for every K, key K, in the key space, where there is an encryption, so I'll refer to it as an encryption, but it's an encryption rule, encryption function. So this guy right here is going to consist of a whole bunch of encryption rules depending on key K. Encryption with a corresponding decryption, DK. I'm not thinking Donkey Kong here. It's literally D subscript K. So that it has the following properties. So that, let's define what each one of the EKs and DKs would be and the property they would have. First, each EK is a function that maps, it takes plain text and it gives me a cipher text. Each GK, naturally, think back to thinking about the box. When I put Miss Kitty in the box, she's encrypted, right? So I need to decrypt it. But that means that the box with Miss Kitty in it is ciphertext, right? I've obscured it. You didn't know that there was a cat in there, right? You didn't know that there was a cat. So, except that you've probably seen me put the cat in there. So it takes ciphertext and it outputs plain text. And the third and most important property here is that if I apply the decryption with key K on the encryption on my plain text, or say this could even be a symbol in the plain text, that distinguishing remark that I'll make, I'll talk more about that when we start talking about the communication channel. But it has to be that if I give you the encrypted text, the ciphertext, when I apply the decryption, it gives me back the plain text X. For every plain text X in fancy P, set of plain text. So just a couple quick remarks, just to emphasize the things I was going to say before I define the communication channel, is it'll be typical for us to talk about the plain text as a sequence of symbols. We could also treat these like numbers as well. In some contexts, it will be indistinguishable between the two concepts. So I'll try to be careful when I do things like this, because there's natural correspondences that exist between characters and numbers. So very often, it'll be typical that we'll run into cases where the plain text is actually of the form of a sequence of symbols, as I've defined it akin to up here. So you might notice that my definition, depending on how I define what P and C are, it might be the case that it might actually apply symbol by symbol. So in some cases, it'll be helpful for us to talk about the encryption and decryption by a symbol that represents plain text, or you think of it as a sequence of symbols, and that is the plain text. But often we'll talk about it in different contexts like this. So if I imagine I give you the plain text X, it could be that the case is that it's really just a sequence of symbols. So I might treat this one and the same as X in this definition, or I might use just one symbol. So some xi could be X in this definition here. And when I talk about the plain text here, I might be referring to what the symbols can be versus what they can be encrypted into. So please note that when I talk about this, it could be the case that it could be or to xi. And naturally, when you think about each one of the symbols, it is that I apply the encryption and I end up with a cipher text, which is going to be a symbol of the cipher text. That when I naturally apply this, I get back the symbol that would have been in the original plain text, or the message. So it's just a technical remark that has largely to do with how I define what the crypto system is. So for some, it'll be helpful for us to think about it symbol by symbol. That's very natural to do, as I will do here. This is why I want to make this remark, is that whenever I say X here, I'm actually could be referring to just a symbol in the plain text. So you imagine it like I'm sending symbol by symbol the message, or I take the whole message, I apply it symbol by symbol, and then I can decrypt each symbol afterwards. Is that clear, everybody? I'm hoping that is clear. That sometimes it's helpful to think about it as a sequence like this. Other times it's helpful to just think of the entire message. So in our case, we'll think about it symbol by symbol. We'll apply the encryption rule or encryption to each symbol. So let's talk about the communication channel now. We'll see how we can talk about what we just did over here with Miss Kitty. And Miss Kitty's still in the box. Oh, that Miss Kitty. She's very silly, isn't she? So now, let's talk about the communication channel. So it's going to be an important aspect of all of this. So you'll notice that the definition I gave for a crypto system will fit perfectly in with this. So we'll see how this works. So if you understood everything up to this point, so keep in mind I will give you an example proper when we get there of a crypto system. But just please keep in mind the idea that we have plain text that we encrypt. And then what we do is we take this message, then we send it over the channel. We can either do it symbol by symbol or the whole thing. You can imagine either scenario. The channel is an abstract idea. It's a model. It's a model. So here's how we can think about this. So messages. So I'll lovingly refer to this as the Alice Bob or Bob Alice model for cryptography. That's what I usually refer to it as. But, and usually people will know what you're talking about, but I must stress that you could specialize this model or take and change little aspects of it. So messages are sent over a communication channel. So I haven't really told you what that means yet. Communication channel. And this is involving two agents. Channel from agent A. So I'll refer to this as Alice to agent B. And this will be Bob. So so you want some examples of communication channels where the channel itself can take many forms. And it has, historically speaking, right? You'll see when we get to more examples that these things, this is a model. So the channel itself could mean many different things. The point is that if it fits the model, then most certainly it applies. It can take many forms, such as a phone line. So a phone line, you can think of just this scenario, right? Alice is talking to Bob about her favorite supper dish, for example. It could be the case that is what is happening, such as a phone line. Such as a phone line, a radio wave. Could be a radio wave, as would be the case in some scenarios, such as a military, historically speaking. It could also be it could be a computer network line. Be something you'd very often run into, such as with some websites where you have secure information across them, or so-called secure information. It could be sent over a network. So I'm sending messages. Those messages are in the form of packets, right? So Alice wants to send a message, send plain text, just to put it in our terms, send plain text to Bob. So this plain text could be many different things. It could be English text, for example. It could be numeric data. But here's what Alice is going to do. So I'm going to draw a picture. It's going to walk us through step by step, akin to something we just did over here. So I'm going to draw some fun pictures. So suppose we have Alice here. Give Alice a pretty dress. So here's Alice. This is A. And suppose I have Bob over here. Let's have Bob. There's Bob. Now, the thing that I would like to have happen is imagine Alice wants to send Bob a message. So we're going to modify this ever so slightly as we go along, just to think about this. So suppose Alice sends message X, the plain text. Alice would like to make sure Bob gets this text, right? Gets X. So Alice will send it, so sends X, and Bob receives. Receives X, right? But we have to be careful, right? Because as we talked about before, this communication channel, if I want to ensure there is security, that X gets to Bob without anybody else knowing what X is. That's at least one aspect of this. So let's put this into this model just to make sure it's a little clear what we got going on here. So I'm going to introduce a third actor and third agent, a very keen one. I give this character a beautiful set of glasses. Some beautiful glasses. I'm going to refer to this actor as, or agent, as Eve, or Agent E. So suppose that you do send over this channel, you send message X. So you send the plain text X. In the current setup, what would happen? Well, most certainly if Eve is eavesdropping, then most certainly Eve can get your communication, right? Your message. So for example, if you're talking about your favorite supper dish, say you made a really great pizza the other day or something like that, who knows? Eve is going to find out all about your lovely supper dish. So we need to do something a little bit here if we want to improve the communication channel. Namely, we want to make it more secure, right? Ensure that Alice and Bob's message can't be intervened by Eve and be understood by Eve. So the and part is very important. Well, certainly if we're using an insecure channel to do this, there's reasons why we might do that. We want to make sure that the message is absolutely just garbage if we can. We would like to make that message garbage for Eve. So Eve just can't simply just know what you're making for supper, okay? So we're going to introduce a couple of things. So we're going to want to have it as we talked about. Maybe Alice will encrypt X. So we're going to have encryption. And imagine that this encrypted message, the ciphertext, becomes Y. Now, to take this and turn it back into X, we have to apply the property we had for our cryptosystem, right? We need the decryption algorithm. We need to decipher it. So we're going to have some decryption in place. That is going to, so we're going to encrypt. And we're going to need the decrypt. So notice that if I do a very good job of encrypting X, I get Y. I send Y across this channel, and I must stress that this is an insecure channel. I mean, somebody can listen in on this channel. So it's an insecure channel. Somebody could just sit there, they put a big earpiece on and just listen in on what's going on. That's the hypothetical, of course. What Eve might do is just simply want to listen, but Eve could take a more malicious role, where Eve actually has more capabilities than just this. So in cryptography, a big element of this communication is what techniques can you use to deal with adversaries. So for example, Eve is an adversary. So in this case, Eve's intention isn't necessarily malicious, but most certainly it plays a competitive role in the sense that we don't want Eve to know what X is. So we send Y instead and hope that Eve can't just simply figure out what the key would be and naturally the original message X. But there's something that we brought up when we talked about encryption and decryption. Well, we had this notion of a key space, so naturally we're going to need something to... We're going to have some source for those keys. So whether it be some pseudo-random number generator or something along those lines that both parties have agreed upon, or it could be that they both just wrote down the secret code that they would like to use as to make their keys. I don't know, but the point is that this is going to be broad enough that we have it where both parties have a key. Now, it might be more general than just this, just to be very clear. But the point is, you imagine that there is a key that is given over a secure channel. So, as a quick example of what a secure channel would be, is me taking, suppose that Alice takes key K and physically gives it in an envelope over to Bob. Just as an example. There's other ways you can have a secure channel. The point is somebody can't just simply eavesdrop on this. But the point is we need this key for encryption and decryption as per our definition over there, right? So, when Alice sends X, Alice encrypts X to get Y. Y gets sent over this insecure channel over to where Bob is at. Bob has access to the same key, or at least the key necessary to decrypt Y so that Bob receives X. So this is what the communication channel is. So this is the model for which much and many aspects of cryptography are studied over. So I must stress that, like I said, Eve is just one character. There's many other types of adversaries you could have. For example, Eve could take a far more malicious role, or a far more controlled role, in the sense that Eve could, for example, be not just listening, but could, for example, have the ability to mutate the message. We're not going to study that scenario here, but most certainly that is another aspect of the communication channel, which you can study in different ways. But we'll just think about Eve more as just this adversary that has a vested interest in our supper dishes, okay? They want to make their own cookbook out of our favorite recipes. So you might ask, Dan, if you're looking at this model, you might be staring at this and saying, Dan, why don't they just send X over the secure channel? Why can't they just do that? Well, one major issue with doing this is it's fairly expensive. Did I mention just that, like in my example? And I want to stress this doesn't have to be the only way to do it, but you just imagine every day you want to send a message over to Bob. Say you're sending an email, and you want to make sure that these are top secret emails that get encrypted or something. You wouldn't want to have it unless you absolutely just sat there and said, this is the only form of technology we got. Where Alice physically hands Bob the message every single time. That might work for some applications, but it's fairly costly if you have many messages you would like to send, right? And here's the benefit. Well, all sorts of things, like you might know about this thing called the internet, for example, and it makes it so you can route messages over the internet. And if you would like to send messages over the internet, it's not necessarily going to be the case that it's going to be secure. It's going to be very often insecure. And that's much cheaper for sending messages. At least if we're thinking about if Alice and Bob were on the other side of a city. That could be a lot of money over time. So, the other thing I also want to point out is that the secure channel could also be slower. So, we can put this into all sorts of different settings. It could be, for example, that if we thought of Alice and Bob as, say, let's go back ancient times. Suppose that Alice rules one kingdom and Bob rules another kingdom. Well, Alice could physically hand Bob the message, but instead Alice might want to instead use a messenger, maybe a pigeon or something like that, I don't know. The point is, using a messenger, that is one layer of now transmitting that message, so putting it in an envelope and giving it to the messenger to bring it to Bob. Well, there's a lot of stuff that can happen in between here, right? So if I do it directly, remember, Alice, that's very expensive to bring Alice over to Bob to give it over, right? Or like even having the keys and bringing it over. It's something you don't have to do as often, so it's much more feasible. But if Alice just were to go to see Bob every single time, well, what happens to Alice's kingdom? Well, I don't know, that seems like an awfully expensive thing to do, right? But the point is, sending a messenger instead, it might leave you vulnerable to someone finding out that message, whether they steal the message from you, from the messenger, to be a bit more precise, or do something else with the message. The point is that you would like it so that it's cheaper for you to send messages, right? But there's a trade-off in this, is that you can leave yourself open for vulnerabilities. And one way to deal with insecurity is by introducing security. And one way to do that is making your messages unintelligible to someone that might want to know what you're talking about, whether it be your favorite recipe, or this could be military codes. So, just as a general principle, just to tie this all up. So the general principle that we'll very often use when we talk about cryptography. So assume that the knowledge of the general system, or algorithm for encryption, via EK, or like say if we're talking about like one individual symbol or perhaps the entire message, say for example, if we consider just more broadly like this, for key K is known to Eve. Suppose Eve knows this. suppose that Eve just doesn't know what the key is. That seems to be a pretty fairly reasonable assumption if we're talking about security. So only the key K is assumed not to be, I'll say not known. Not known to Eve. So remember, Eve can receive a copy of the ciphertext. So we're going to use the general principle. This is the one we're going to measure by. Is assume that this person, Eve, could know the general system and the encryption for how the encryption is done. But they know it for a particular key, possibly. But they don't know what the key K is. So that's going to be the vulnerability for which we would like to improve our security. So we'll be interested in techniques for which we carry out this process, such that we want to make sure that Eve can't figure out, or at least buy ourselves as much time as feasibly needed, so that we could send the message over from Alice to Bob. So in many settings, it will just be a question of time when it comes to security as opposed to true security. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But what we're going to do is we're going to study various ciphers and cryptosystems in relation to this general principle and try to measure how good or bad, at least in some standard, akin to something of like this, these different cryptosystems can be over this type of scenario. In addition, we'll also study all sorts of other scenarios related to cryptography. But yeah, that's my main introduction for cryptography. I hope you enjoyed it. So, are there any questions? Any questions before we get started? Because we're going to start off with so today we're going to be focusing in on a fairly basic cipher. I will tell you up front, by the objective measure, like the measure that we sort of have here, this is not going to be a terribly good cipher, but for the scenario for which this existed and was first put into practice, possibly, historically speaking, it probably was fairly effective for the purposes at that time. But based on the standards that I have right here, for what would be secure, it's not a terribly good system. But it's enough of a system that if you want to make some secret messages to send to one of your friends, or maybe you're living with somebody and you want to tell them about what you're doing in your day, but you don't want, say, another friend that comes over to know what you're talking about and they just are fairly lazy, this might be a way to go about it. This might be. Okay. So let's talk a bit more about this. I'm just drinking some water here. Okay. So let me just erase the boards here. So please remember this scenario, because this plays a big, like if you don't want to remember that 5 tuple there, this scenario, the one we just derived here together with this model, this is the one, if there's one thing to take away from today's lecture, it is this one right here. So if you want to know one of the key aspects of cryptography, it's sitting right here. And many variants on this model are what cryptographers think all about all the time. Or if you're a crypto researcher in computer science, perhaps you're fairly interested in different aspects of this model. So we could talk about all sorts of different things that get sent across a channel like this. But there's other elements of this as well, as we talked about near the beginning of today's lecture. You'll notice I didn't really talk at all about authentication or anything like that. But the point is fairly simple, is that this is one of the kind of standard things that we would study when it comes to cryptography. So let me just erase the boards here. And then we're going to start talking about our first cipher. If I'm walking with a little bit of a limp here today, just because I'm a little bit of pain here. So please just don't mind. Sometimes I just gotta walk it off a little bit. So I must stress that this cipher is going to be primarily to enforce aspects of the definition of a cryptosystem. And we're going to be adopting this idea that we have. We're going to take each symbol in the plain text. We're going to use this encryption rule or encryption function or encryption algorithm or encryption, more colloquially, to create the ciphertext. And then we can send the message. My penguin friend is flopping around here. I'm just gonna... There we go. My little penguin friend was flopping around a little bit. But the point I'm getting at is that when you send things over this channel, it could be parts of the plain text, it could be the whole thing. We're just gonna presume when we discuss this that the entire message goes over upon being encrypted. But I must stress that when you have the plain text and you encrypt it, it gets sent over the channel. I don't say much about how it's getting sent, but you know most certainly that in our scenario, we're going to keep it fairly simple, that the whole ciphertext is sent. And it doesn't really matter because Eve could just simply sit there just waiting for one packet at a time of it and just snoop on that, right? It doesn't make much of a difference. So previously we had talked about what cryptography is, or at least gave ourselves a kind of a broad view of it. We also introduced some key ideas such as the communication channel and what a cryptosystem is. We talked about it in a broad sense because there's many kinds of cryptosystems. But we're going to start off just to illustrate these concepts with a fairly basic cipher from classic cryptography called the shift cipher. So by the end of this, you should be able to pick it up and have some little bit of fun with it. So I encourage you to play with it with your friends, okay? So here's the idea in the shift cipher. So imagine I have my plain text. This is the message you're going to want to send over the communication channel. And I must stress that once we've encrypted the message, it gets sent over the communication channel over to the other agent for decryption. And the person that sends the message and the one that receives the message, they'll have the keys to do their tasks of encryption and decryption, respectively. So they have agreed upon what the keys will be. So here's the idea for the shift cipher before we get into the definition that we're going to have. So what we're going to do is we're going to take symbols in the plain text, and shift the value, I'll kind of colloquially use the word value here, of each symbol in the message or plain text by an amount. And you might ask, what's the amount? The amount is the key. Keep it simple like this. So I must stress that this is fast and easy to compute for encryption and decryption, right? If I shift, so imagine I take each one of the symbols, and I'll get into more detail what I mean by shifting the value of a symbol. But this idea of just taking, imagine each symbol has a value, I add or subtract that value, and then I get another value for which there is a symbol. This should be fairly easy for me to carry out using modular arithmetic. Well, just doing some basic arithmetic, I'm able to carry this out. So here's the definition of a shift cipher using our concept of a cryptosystem. So we're going to define it in terms of reading each symbol in the plain text. So our notion of the plain text applies to the whole message, but also within the context of our definition here, it may as well apply to one of the symbols that's a part of the message. For us, it doesn't make much of a difference. You're going to do this to the entire message anyways. So fix sum. So we're going to fix sum b, which is going to be a positive integer. So this is going to be a constant. So consider when the possible plain text is equal to the possible ciphertext, which is going to be equal also to the keys. It's going to be equal to the set of all integers, where ZB here, fancy ZB, this would be equal to 0, 1, 2, all the way up to, but doesn't include B. It goes up to B minus 1. So for example, if I had Z26, that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 25. So that means that the plain text ciphertext can be interpreted, so our symbols that we're going to have, that's what I want you to think about this as. They're going to be represented as numeric, they're going to be numbers. That's how you can interpret them, but they're going to have corresponding values for their symbols. But they're going to be thought about as numbers here. But the key will be somewhere along this range. I must stress that formally speaking, the key can be larger or smaller than this, but most certainly it all will map into this range anyways. Just to be clear, so it doesn't matter. You'll see why eventually. Consider when those are all equal. So I haven't addressed the encryption and decryption yet. For each key K, that's going to be between, but includes 0, but doesn't include B, let the encryption and decryption of symbols XY in ZB in plain text. So we're going to be talking about the symbols in the plain text when I define this. Plain text and ciphertext, respectively. To be defined as follows. So I'm going to define it as follows. So naturally, I got to tell you what E is and what D is for a given key K. So just keep in mind our idea here. So I'm going to interpret the symbols X and Y as numbers. So EK of X is going to be X plus K modulo B. So I'm going to take whatever the numeric representation of that symbol is. I'm going to add K to it. That's the key. I'm going to reduce modulo B. And decryption will be done on a symbol Y, where I just simply subtract off the key value, modulo B. So this is how I'm going to define the shift cipher for you. Often in practice, what will happen is you'll have it where B is going to be a number that's going to correspond to the number of symbols that are going to be possible in your messages, hence why these are all equal like this. For example, if I'm just going to care about alphabetical symbols like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but only one case of them, then it's 26, right? Because there's 26 letters in the English alphabet. So keep in mind that the setup here is that somebody's going to decide on what B is, and then they're going to have some key. And then I'm going to have for each K, for each one of the Ks, so those are the possible keys, I'm going to have EK and DK defined as follows. So remember it's going to be applied to each symbol in the plain text for EK, and it'll apply to each symbol in the ciphertext DK. So in this scenario, this is just the exact one I talked about when I talked about the cryptosystem, and this is fairly common, is you'll have it where on each one of the symbols in the plain text, you're going to apply our encryption rule or encryption algorithm, or encryption, and respectively decryption. So, just to come back to this idea, that you can have a value for each symbol. This is not a strange concept. This happens all the time in computing. For example, you might know of ASCII. So, ASCII is a fairly common standard for which symbols have corresponding values on your keyboard. So, very often what you'll do is you'll have it where you have like all your ABCs, you may have periods, you may even have special symbols for things like a space, a backspace, a tab, other things that I won't go into too much detail here. I put a link in the notes to discuss this more about ASCII. But the point I'm getting at is that in practice, if you're trying to implement one of these and you just want to care about alphabetical letters, what you would do is you would take each one of the symbols, you can cast it, that's a programming mechanism, you cast each one of your characters in the string, your symbols, each one to be an integer. And they correspond to different types of values, such as ASCII. There's other standards that also exist. But the thing is, if you want to keep it so it's between this range, in practice what you do is you would subtract off the offset for which that character set begins at. For example, the uppercase letter A doesn't actually sit at 0 or something like that, or lowercase a doesn't sit at 0. It sits higher up in the ASCII values. So if you just check out the link, you just simply subtract off that little bit amount when you're undergoing this process. So that's just one other detail here. But for us in our discussion, we'll just simply use a table that gives us the corresponding values for each one of the symbols. So this is what a shift cipher is. We're going to do some examples. But suppose we wish to encrypt some English text. So we're going to consider b is equal to 26 and assign each number in Z26 a letter. So just to elaborate what I mean, 0, so if I give you 0, this is the same as me saying A, 1 is B, 2 is C, and so on. So we'll make a table to help us do this. So to carry out this process, as just to elaborate here, remember, you're going to take each symbol in the plain text. You're going to apply EK of whatever that symbol is. You'll end up with a symbol for the ciphertext. You're going to apply this to each one of the symbols because your plain text will look something like this. You feed each one of these XI values over here. And then as a result, you end up with a corresponding symbol for the ciphertext. And you'll end up with a resulting ciphertext at the end of this. Y1, Y2, and so on, Ym. For which the result of this becomes Y1, for example, if that was X1. So you just do this for each one of these. And when you want to decrypt, you take each one of those. So for example, Y1, the first symbol, I give it over here, and then I end up with getting X1 back. So as long as you understand the process here, it's a piece of cake, right? You just apply this to each one of the symbols. So I have some more details about this in the notes, but let's make a table to help us understand how to carry out this process. So suppose I have my symbol and I have a number. So let's make a table here. So A, as I said, is 0. So we're assigning each of Z26 a letter. So B is 1, C is 2, D is 3, E is 4, F is 5, G is 6, H is 7, I is 8, J is 9, K is 10, L is 11, M is 12. I love how it's just sort of slanting this way. Okay, M is 12. N is 13. Let's make another column here to help us. So suppose I give you O. O is 13. P is 14. Wait, 14. You don't want to mix these up. So O is 14, P is 15, Q is 16, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So let's just fill in the rest. So R is 17, S is 18, T is 19, U is 20, V is 21, W is 22, X is 23, Y is 24, and Z is 25. Old sucker. So what's the process of doing this? So let's do an example. Let's go step by step through this. So suppose we encrypt using a shift cipher with key K is equal to 7. So we're going to use 7 as the key. The following plain text. So what we're going to encrypt is we're going to encrypt the message. I usually put the plain text in lowercase letters to keep this simple. It's going to be have a beautiful day. Sounds like a pretty appropriate message. Have a beautiful day. So what's the first thing I need to do? To understand what each of these correspond to, I need to convert them over to being what their values are. So we're going to use this table to help us do that. So the first thing we're going to do is to take each symbol and give its value. So we're just going to cast what the... So you can think of this just as casting if we're to implement this. Or if I had a table that told me what each value is, I might use that as well. So take each one of the symbols and give its value to produce a number sequence. So this is one way of going about it. So if we look at our table over there, the first, we have H. H is 7. A is 0, right? A is 0. V is 21. let's see, we got E. E is 4. A is 0, right? Then now, actually, let me underline these as we're going so we don't lose track of things. So we got B next, that's 1, right? E, 4. A is 0. U is 20. T, got 19. I, 8. I is 8. Then we have F is 5. U, we've got 20. Got 20. Then we got 11, right? 11's I. No, wait, 20. No, 11 is L. Yeah, L. I was about to say I for some reason. This is why we have to be very careful. Make sure you look carefully at the table and make sure you're transcribing the letters to numbers carefully. Then I got D. D is 3. I'm just going to put 3 over here because I'm running out of space on that side. So D is 3. And then we have A is 0, right? And Y is 24. So here's our number sequence that represents the values of each one of these. Now, next step, we're going to take each number X and we're going to apply EK of X. This will shift each one of the letters by the value. With wraparound, of course. With wraparound. Remember, we have mod, it's mod 26. So we're going to have wraparound. So I'll remind you about that in a moment. So remember, it's X plus the key mod B. B is 26 here. So we're going to shift each X by K mod 26. So we're going to take each one of these numbers, we're going to add 7 to it, and then we're going to apply mod 26. So for those that aren't acquainted with modular arithmetic, is just if ever we go up to 26 or higher, it wraps back around it. 26 mod 26 is 0. 27 mod 26 is 1. Think of it as the amount of remainder it is for which if I divided one number by 26. So let's go through each one of these numbers. We're going to add 7 to it. So 7 plus 7 mod 26 is 14. 0 plus 7 mod 26 is 7. 21 plus 7 is what? Is 28, right? So 26 mod 26 is 0. 27 mod 26 is 1. 28 mod 26 is 2. Now next we got 4. 4 plus 7 is 11. 0 again, just 7. 1, okay, 1 plus 7, that's 8. I sure hope that is correct. 4, we got 11 again. Then we've got 7, again, because that's 0. 20. 20 plus 7 is 27. Mod 26, that should just be what? What should it be? Just 1, right? Because 26 mod 26 is 0. So it means 27 mod 26 is 1. Then, after that, we've got, let's see, 19 plus 7. That gets you 26. 26 mod 26 is 0. We have no remainder in that case. We have 8 plus 7. That is just 15, right? Then we have 5 plus 7 is 12. Then we have 20. We have 20 plus 7. So we have 27 mod 26. That means, remember, 26 mod 26 is 0, right? So 27 mod 26 is 1. 11 plus 7 is 18. Then we have our last 3 here. Well, 3 plus 7 is 10. We get anything by modding it by 26. Then with 10, 7, and 5. Notice that 24 plus 7, what is that? What is that? Well, let's think about it. Let's think about it. So what would be 24 plus 7? So we have 24 plus 7 mod 26. Well, we know 26 mod 26, that's 0, right? 27 mod 26 is 0. Is it 0? No, it's 1, right? 28 mod 26, that's 2. But what is this number here? Well, 23 plus 7 would be 30, right? So it's 31. This is 31. So for those that can see the answer right away, let me go carefully through this. Got 29 mod 26, that's 3. Then we have 30 mod 26, that's 4. 31 mod 26, that's 5, right? That should be what you expect, right? Because if I take 31, subtract away 26, what do I get? Well, I'll let you think about it. So anyways, the last number here is going to be 5. So now I have to take each one of these numbers, and now I convert it back to being a symbol, its corresponding symbol. So I've applied the encryption now to the numbers as per our rule over here. Now we need to actually represent them as symbols. So convert, resulting sequence back to symbols. So we're going to turn it back to the symbols to yield the ciphertext, right? So all I do is I go through each one of these and I read off what the symbol would be for each one of those. So let's take a look. We have 14. 14 is O. I'm going to write it in capital letters as per our discussion in the past. So 7 is H. Then I have, actually, let me underline these as we're going. 2, what's 2? C. Then next, 11. 11, right? That's L. Then we have 7 again. Number 7 is H. Then I have, next, 8. I, right? Okay, that's the next letter over anyways. I, 11. What's 11? Well, it's L again, right? We have L again. Then we have 7 again. 7 is H. Then we have 1. 1 is B. Then I have 0. That's just A. Easy peasy. We got 15, that's P. Then we got 12. 12 is, where is 12? Oh, it's over there. Got M. Then we have 1, that's B. Let me just make that M a little better. Make sure it's clear that that's an M. B, and then 18. 18 is S. S. Then we got 10. Yeah, 10 is K. Then we have, lastly, 7. 7 we've already established is H. And lastly, we have 5. 5 is F. And there we go. Now we got our resulting ciphertext. So this is what you give your friend if you don't want your other friends to find out what the message is. At least presuming that they're not very good at or astute to notice this kind of trickery that we're doing. We'll talk more about that in the future. So let's talk now about how we would decrypt this. So let's walk through this process, and fortunate for us, this process is essentially just the same thing but in reverse, right? But the thing we have to be careful about is how the decryption works. So remember we applied to each one of the symbols, but we have to be careful, right? Because there's a technicality around modular arithmetic. Remember, dk of y is y minus k mod b, right? And b is 26 for us. So one thing we have to think about carefully, for those that are astute about modular arithmetic, you might know that, oh yeah, you can have negative numbers for a mod. That is true, and I want to talk about this now. So when you subtract off k, there's a very real possibility. Remember how we had a wraparound effect that happened? Where if we go over, if we have 26 or higher, it wraps around? Well, we have the opposite effect happens when it's negative. It's walking backwards. Instead of going back around like this, back to 0, you go backwards up to 25, then you go 24, 23, 22, and so on. So that's how this works. So just to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So if I give you, for example, minus 1 mod 26, this is equal to 25. So that's 25. How about minus 5? Well, walk backwards, right? Remember, 0 mod 26 is 26. Minus 1 mod 26 is 25. So walk backwards from 26. So we know 0 is 26. So 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, right? And of course, minus 27 mod 26, if you really want to go have some fun with this. Well, it's 1 higher than 26 originally. So being minus that, it just means I'm going to shift over really by 1 because it goes the whole way around. If you think about it like a clock. So I just want to make sure you're aware of this. So we're going to walk through this process that I have over here, back upwards. So we're going to try to get back, have a beautiful day. So I was thinking, why don't we do it over here? Because I really want to convince you that you get back what you originally had. Now, for those that are possibly astute about this, you'll see quite quickly that it is going to give you the same thing back. But I want to make sure we walk through it carefully. So that way you understand the decryption process. So remember, we're going to take each one of the symbols in the ciphertext. We're going to apply the decryption rule, or decryption, which remember, it is just simply whatever the number, its corresponding number is, minus the key. Remember, our key is 7. Then you apply mod 26, because B is 26 here. So let's decrypt the ciphertext. So what I have over here is what Alice would do. What we're going to do is we're going to do what Bob does. So what we're going to do is we need to take all of these ciphertext symbols, convert them over to being a number sequence again. So we're going to take each one of these, convert ciphertext, the ciphertext to a number sequence. As before. So we're going to go through each one of those. I'm going to now write out what those would be as numbers. I'll give you a heads up, it's going to be the exact same sequence I have there. But remember, I really want to convince you that this is going to be fine. So, let's see here. So we got O. O is 14. So O is 14. Next we have H. H is 7. C is 2. Then we have L. L is 12. Or is it 11? It's 11. My eyes are deceiving me here. So I'm just trying to show you what Alice and Bob would do. So Alice did all this work. Bob's got to do this work now. So now we got O, H, C, L. So Bob receives this. And now we're going to keep going. So next we got H. H is 7. Right? Then we have I. I is the next letter over. That's 8. Then we have another H. Right? Another H. Let's see. You got 7, 8. 7, 8. Then we have L. That's 11. 11. Then we got H. That's 7. Then I have a B. So I have 11. Sorry, I have 7. 7, and then I have a 1. Then I have A, which is 0. 0, then P is 15. So I have 0, 15. 0, 15. Then I have M. M is 12. B is 1. 12. Then 1. Then I have S and then K. S is 18. K is 10. So we got 18, 10. 18, 10. Then H and then F. H, F. 7. And then, of course, 5. And there we go. We got our number sequence. Now, next, what we need to do is we need to take each one of these. I'm going to now have to subtract off 7, then reduce to modulo 26, right? So we're going to shift backward by K for each Y in the ciphertext. So let's take each one of them and let's apply our process here. So 14 minus 7 is 7. Because remember, we know K is 7. That's what Bob knows. Bob knows that. So I have 7. 7 minus 7, 0. 2 minus 7. 2 minus 7. 2 minus 7 mod 26. What would that be? Well, let's think about it. Well, if I subtract off the 2, that leaves me 5. So I'm subtracting off 5 from 0. So it's 0 minus 5. So it's minus 5 mod 26. And we've actually established that this already was 21 earlier. Next, we got 11 minus 7. That's 4 mod 26. 7 minus 7. That's 0 mod 26. Got 8. 8 minus 7 is 1 mod 26. 11 minus 7, that's 4 again, mod 26. 7 minus 7, that is 0 mod 26. 1 minus this amount, well, it's 1 more than it would have been in the case that that it will be shifted over one more than it was in that case, right? Right? So that'll be 20. Because if that was 21, this is 20. Then next, 0 minus 7. What is that? That's 19, right? Because that's one less than this one. And this one was 20. I encourage you to walk backwards. So imagine just like you're going through a clock, you're walking, instead of going clockwise around the clock, go counterclockwise around the clock. But imagine it's a clock that has 20, it has numbers 0 up to 25. 2019. So let's see, we got this one, 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 and that one. 15. 15 subtract 7. What should we get? What's that? 15 minus 7. What's 15 minus 7? Well, subtract off the 5, you get 10. Then you subtract off 2, you get 8, right? Get 8. Then next we have what? 12. 12. Well, this should be 5, right? Take off 2 off 7, then you have 5 left. 1. Well, we already established for 1 that, how much is that? How much was it? It was 20, right? It was 20 mod 26 as a result after I go backwards, right? So I must stress that if you're implementing this, a lot of programming languages get this mod operator incorrectly implemented. It doesn't handle the negative numbers. So please be mindful of this. You might want to write your own. If not, just write your own function, then add in the functionality for the negative numbers if your programming language doesn't support that. So next we've got, what do we have next? So we have 12, we took care of 1, right? 18. 18 minus 7, that's 11. That one's easy. How about 10? 10 minus 7, that's 3. 7 minus 7, that's 0. Mod 26, 5. So now you got to go walk back 2 steps. 24. Go 25, 24. So these are all of my shifted values. I shifted back by k, which is 7. And now we got to convert it back to symbols, right? Finally, convert each of these numbers back to symbols. So let's read them off. So let's look at our table. So we got 7. 7 is H. 0, 1. 21. 21 is V. Whoops, I'm getting really excited here. 4, E. 0 is A. 1 is B. 4 is E. 0 again, A. 20 is U. 19 is T. 8 is I. 5, F. 20, U. 11, L. Then we got D for 3, A for 0, and 24 is Y. And have a beautiful day. There you go. There you go. That is the shift cipher. That's the shift cipher. The board says it all. Are there any questions? Any questions what we carried out here? Any questions at all? So this is how the shift cipher works. So I walked carefully through one example with you. You can see that when you're doing this with a human, you see this process is just a matter of looking carefully at this table and understanding how to use modular arithmetic. So as long as you understand how to apply that type of arithmetic, it's a piece of cake. It's just thinking of arithmetic in terms of reading a clock almost of sorts, like an analog clock. As long as you're good with remainders, this goes pretty well by hand. But as I said previously, if you want to put this in a computer program, you could just read off each one of the symbols, get its numeric corresponding value. You can always shift it to so it matches Z26 by that amount. And then you can apply appropriately mod, or after you add or subtract, depending if you're encrypting or decrypting. So this is something that you can accomplish using a loop. So this is fairly easy to implement on a computer, but just I warn you about the negative, the negative values that could come out of this. So make sure you have something to account for this. So whether it just be a simple if statement that handles that situation, or you want to make something a little bit more general, go for it. Go for it. Just be careful. But I haven't gone so much into detail about this type of arithmetic up to this point. I will at some point when we talk more about that in our discrete maths for computer science series. But there's a lot of properties that modular arithmetic has. Modular arithmetic. So I thought I would do another example, but I would want to show you, mainly for those that are interested, how you can take this idea of the shift cipher and put it into practice so that it's faster for a human to do it. But it comes with some nasty costs. So when you come up with the key, you're going to have to build a table kind of like this every single time you come up with another key. So you might have a book of keys, which is something that you might actually do in practice. Years ago, this was actually something quite common. You'd have a code book. So like these are all codes, for example. So let me just erase the board here. So we're going to talk about a special case of this. Just as another example of us applying the shift cipher. And then we'll talk about how effective as a cipher is the shift cipher. It'll be helpful to contextualize it with our example. So let's see what happens. So just erasing the board here, and then we're going to talk about a special case of the shift cipher. So if you're looking for something to do with your friends afterwards, it was just a prank, bro. That kind of thing. Just don't do anything too nasty for me. Don't blame me for it, okay? That's all I'm getting at. Having a little bit of fun here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to consider a special case now of the shift cipher. So let's consider what we're going to refer to help us understand how the shift cipher works and some of the vulnerabilities it has. We're going to consider a special case of it called the Caesar cipher. So this is just simply an example of a shift cipher. So consider a special case of the shift cipher. Shift cipher with b is equal to 26, and the key is always going to be 3. So this is commonly attributed to Julius Caesar, hence its name. So I must stress that there does exist, at least there's suggestions that there could have existed either more complex systems for doing basic cryptography like this back in those days as well. But I'm not going to get into those details here. So I've also included some evidence for this claim as well from old literature. So I thought I would read a passage for you for dramatic purpose because I have it right in front of me. So I must stress also that versions like the Caesar cipher have been used also historically in the past. For example, by Augustus, which has connections with Caesar, using the key k is equal to 1, shifting by 1 letter. This shifts by 3 letters. So let me read this passage for you. For dramatic purposes, I'll read it in this fashion. There are also letters of his to Cicero, as well to his intimates on private affairs, and in the latter, if he had anything confidential to say, he wrote it in cipher, that is, by so changing the order of the letters of the alphabet, that not a word could be made out. If anyone wishes to decipher these and get at their meaning, he must substitute the 4th letter of the alphabet, namely D, for A, and so with the others. So that's from Life of Julius Caesar 56. so there's also some other fun passages also that you can find involving Augustus that talk also about this idea. But remember, Augustus used a somewhat different approach. But again, like I said, there may have been other ciphers used during these time period as well. This is just one that Caesar liked using apparently for private communications. It also must be stressed, and I'll emphasize this later, is that in the time period of Caesar, okay, literacy was really low, okay, compared to today. So even being able to hide your messages in this fashion is already quite a high guard from someone that's your average person. Likewise, even if they were literate, the question of if even they could read the word, if they would understand that it's actually a bunch of cipher text that this person specifically did some things to. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to understand that. They'll just see it's a bunch of gibberish. But the point I'm getting at is that you have to have some perspective on the past. That's what I'm saying. So remember, the key is already fixed. That's one thing I really want you to note here. Here, the key is already fixed. So it means that if you knew someone is using a Caesar cipher, you know right away k is equal to 3, and you know exactly how to decrypt their messages, right? So that's a problem, right? But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So now that you know what's actually fixed, we can actually save a lot of time. When it comes to computing stuff, instead we could just use a lookup table. And this is helpful for human eyes. So you can go through the exact same process with the shift cipher. You apply k's, 3. But for a human, it might be a little faster to just take a table for which it tells you exactly which symbols go for what things. So I thought it would be helpful for us to do this because we're going to do some examples so that you can see how you can use the shift cipher in this specific setting for the Caesar. So I'm going to try making the table. I'm tempted to put it over here. Let's put it over here. So let's make a table that's going to have the plain text symbol. So the symbols for the plain text, and then its resulting ciphertext symbol. So this is much simpler for us to read off. So I'm just going to go through each one of the symbols. And remember, like I mentioned in my passage, wherever you had an A, you're going to put D. That means for B, you're going to put E, and so on. So plain text symbol, when I have an A, I'm going to put D. B is E. C is F. D is G. Actually, let me write these all out here. D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X. Oh no, I'm running out of space. Dex. Then we'll have Y and Z. Off to the side. I'm gonna fudge this ever so slightly. When I did this once before, it actually did all fit. I think I made myself a little bit too much room up here at the top. So let's just do this. We got H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y. I think I'm missing one here. Q. So P is, what's P? P is S. That's correct. Q is T. R is U. S is V. I think it's the way I wrote this. So we got T is W. U is X. Well, I know Z is going to be C. I know B is going to be Y. And I know X. Actually, where's our friend Z? X, Y. Oh, I see. I had them sort of crunched up here. We have Z, then A. They're all kind of cramped down there. My apologies, everybody. So I encourage you to make a table kind of like this one. Maybe break it into two parts like our previous example. It might fit a little easier on the board. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just redraw the whole thing. Let's just redraw the whole thing. So I'm going to use... because I want this to be easy for us to do. Because that is not very legible. I don't find it acceptable. So we're going to have the plain text symbol. Then we're going to have the cipher text symbol. This will go a little easier. A is D, B E, C F, D G, E H, F I, F I, G J, H K, I L, J M, K N, L is O, and M is P. This is much better. I like this so far. Let's make another one here. M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. It's much better, much better. I like this much more. So now we got Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, A, B, and C. So here's our table. Notice that everywhere I have a letter, notice that like I mentioned in my passage here that I gave you, wherever I have an A, it's going to be D, B is going to be E, and so on. Notice it wraps around, and the last three symbols are going to be those naturally because the key is 3. So everything gets shifted over by 3. So I thought it would be, let's go through some examples applying the Caesar cipher using this table. So notice that the reason how I came up with this table is I would convert these over to the numbers. I add 3 to each of their values, modulo 26, and then I convert it back to the symbol. But I cut a step out of here because it's intuitive enough for those that are using the English text here to know what's 3 letters ahead in the English alphabet. Like 3 letters ahead of A is D. So let's consider some encryption here. So suppose we have Caesar was here. Suppose that this is our plain text. So if I want to encrypt this, all I do is I look at my lovely codes here, my lookup table. So I have C, C becomes F, A is D, E is H, S is V, A is D, R is U, W is Z, A, W, and then we have A is D, and then we have S again. S was V, right? We have V, then we have H. H is K. So remember H over here, it's K right here. So I'm just looking up on the plain text symbol side and getting the corresponding ciphertext symbol. Then we have E. E is H. R, U, and then we have H again. And there's our ciphertext for Caesar was here. So let's do another one. Let's carry out this again. Let's go with learn and have fun. Seems appropriate, right? Learn and have fun. So learn and have fun. L. L is O. E is H. A is D. R is U. N is, where's N? It's Q. Then we have and, D, Q, and then we have D is G. You see how if you did this many times, this would go a lot faster? H is K, A is D, V is Y, E is H, and then I have the last three. We got fun. I, U is X, and then I lastly have N. N is Q. Let's make sure I got it all in there. Yeah, I got it. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. So here's a couple of examples of encrypting using the Caesar cipher. So notice that by taking out the middle steps of computing, I could just simply use this code, this list of codes. And this is how very often, if you want to encrypt things using a simple cipher like this, you might make a table like this one. So let's do some examples of decrypting. So below are examples of decrypting. Ciphertext of a Caesar cipher. So let's go through some messages. Let's see what we get. So we got P, V, N, L, W, W, B. So let's go through symbol by symbol. It's use the Caesar cipher deciphering approach here. So I'm going to shift back all of them by 3. But fortunate for us, that just simply means we look in the column for the ciphertext and we look in the corresponding plaintext symbol column. So for example, capital P, where's capital P? Capital P is right here. That means I put a lowercase m, or it's M. So this becomes M. How about V? Look for V over here, that's S. We got N. Where's capital N? It's over there. It says K. Then we have L. Uppercase L is an I. Then we have, then what else? We got W. We got two W's. They're both T's. Then lastly, we have B. Capital B is Y. And look, this secret message says Miss Kitty. Meow. Yeah, so that's Miss Kitty there. Let's do another example. How about if I gave you VPLOH? So let's go through the same process again. So capital V is S. Capital P, let's look for capital P, it's right there. It says put M. L, that's I over there. O is L. And then we have H. H is E. So in this case, we get smile. So lovely stuff, right? We got smile. Now, so hopefully you get the idea of the Caesar cipher. So notice that because I fix what the key is, I can come up with a table like this. And because I can do that, notice that all it does is it tells me that everything's being shifted by value K. And for each K, there exists such a table like this for a fixed B. Now, that brings me to an important point. How secure is the shift cipher? So let's consider some cryptanalysis. So let me tie this all up in a bow for us. I don't have a whole lot to say here, but I really want you to suppose that Eve, the eavesdropper, obtains the ciphertext. And wanted to determine K. K used to compute it from the plain text. I want to crack this sucker. So if I want to figure out what the plain text is, notice that in the shift cipher, the game in town is if you can figure out K, you can get back the plain text. But there's a little bit of something about the keys. Do you remember in the definition of the shift cipher what the key space is? So recall that the key space is in fact equal to ZB. So these are just the integers 0 up to B minus 1 inclusive. So if B is 26, for example, this would just be 26 numbers, 0 through 25. So one can exhaust, meaning can exhaust all possible keys and this, what I mean by this is the type of attack we're talking about here, or strategy. I should use the word strategy here to be a bit more precise. To analyze using an exhaustive key search. So this is what this will be referred to as. So just trying all possible keys until you find one that makes sense. So there's only B possible values, right? There's only B many. please remember that there's only b possible values, and b is a constant, right? So what do I mean by an exhaustive key search? So try D0, D1, D2. So that means applying the decryption function or decryption with each key potentially being 0, then 1, then 2, and so on until some plain text is obtained to make sense. Meaning that I want you to find some sort of sensible plain text. So you just imagine you just take the ciphertext, you apply the decryption with different values of k. So you just imagine you just apply k for each one of them, and you'll get each time a potential plain text for Eve. So Eve can look at each one of them and says, okay, well, which one makes most sense to me? If it's sensible, it sounds like an English sentence or something like that, it likely might be the original plain text that Alice sent to Bob before encrypting it. So the idea is to be convinced that this is in fact the original plain text. So the cryptanalyst would analyze these potential candidates and see if this is. So what I want you to do, so this is an exercise. What I would like you to do is go through to our example here with the Caesar cipher, but don't tell them that you used the Caesar cipher. Just tell them that they used the shift cipher. Show them the encryption and decryption, walk through the steps just like in our example before with the shift cipher, but don't tell them that you used the Caesar cipher. And see if they try k is equal to 0, k is equal to 1, k is equal to 2, and then when they get the k is equal to 3, ask them if they found your message. So in that case, notice that it would be sitting always when you try D3, right? That's what would happen for the Caesar cipher. So naturally, that makes the Caesar cipher incredibly vulnerable to attacks like this. In fact, it's very easy to attack if you know exactly what the key is in the first place. But in the shift cipher, you imagine you decide upon the keys in advance, and then you ask the question, okay, well, I could just try all of them, right? Well, you just try all of them. There's some constant number of them. It's big old one many of them that exist. You just try them all. And I must stress, remember, B is a constant, right? And normally you wouldn't have this thing being too big. If it is even fairly big, the question is just how long will it take to figure it out? And unfortunately here, it's fairly easy to figure it out, right? Once you've found some plain text that makes sense, you have a pool of them, and you might use frequency analysis to figure out which ones are the ones that you're interested in. Frequency analysis in particular refers to the frequency of the English alphabet. That's another way you also can attack the shift cipher, by the way, is you look at the frequencies of of letters in the words. For example, the letter E appears a lot in English text. So if you see it a lot in a text, it might be likely that it might be an E, just as an example. But the point here is that the key space is small or constant. So it is easy to apply cryptographic attacks such as in this case, we use the exhaustive key search to determine the plain text. With the shift cipher, it's quite bad, right? Because the minute you figure out what the plain text is, you also figure out what the keys are. Like the key that's being used, right? So that's terrible. That's really terrible. So even if you made B so big that it would take somebody like a human quite a while to figure it out, that still doesn't make it terribly secure. Because keep in mind that it tells you everything you need to know about the key being used to at the same time. Likewise, just because the key space is big doesn't mean that somebody just doesn't have a systematic way of figuring it out in the first place, right? So what you want to do is make it really hard to compute and figure out what the key is. Here it's fairly easy because encrypting and decrypting is fairly easy given next to no information, right? That's the problem with the shift cipher, is that we know next to nothing, and brute forcing it just like with an exhaustive key search is enough to figure out what the plain text is, but also what the key is. And that's not a terribly secure system when you talk about crypto systems. So the shift cipher is not secure, at least by our conditions of what secure means. Because Eve can figure out what the key is with a fairly simple attack. So you gotta remember, put this into historical perspective. If people were using shift ciphers way back in those days, they may had good reasons to do so, and it would have been probably good enough for a lot of the applications they were using it for, because the people that often would be involved in these types of conflicts typically were not literate, right? And those that weren't would ask people that are literate, and if they didn't understand either, you're out of luck on that one. But also, you got to keep in mind that it also does come also with the historical context around it. So, that being said, fun with friends, it has its place in certain applications in cryptography that I will not discuss here. But I'm sure you can easily find out a bit more about those on the interwebs, at least in the context of this lecture. If not, I'll also include something if anybody's curious about that. So, that's all I have to say about the shift cipher. So it's one of the easiest ciphers to learn about. And if you enjoyed this, we'll see some more ciphers in the future. Wonderful. So any questions at all? Any questions about the shift cipher? So I must stress, remember, the decryption, if you're putting this in complexity theoretic terms, remember, if the key size, the key space is constant in its size, that means if you think about it in terms of complexity theoretic terms, what does that mean? That means when you're attacking this, so when you list out all of these, if somebody gives you y minus k, and you don't know what this is, but you try k is equal to 0, 1, all the way up to b. Mod 26. Notice 26 is a constant, but you can make it b. B's, well, technically b would be here. But remember, b is a constant. That means that the number of iterations for this is technically constant in terms of algorithmic complexity. So this is fairly easy to break because I could just simply go through each one of these. I try each one for each one of those. So remember, so the number of times I'm going to have to do this for each one of them. Because remember, I try this for each one of the symbols. So this is constant times the length of it. So suppose that this is the length. So if I have the length, so suppose that m is the length of your message. It's just going to end up being big O of m. Because you'll have to decrypt the message, right? You have to decrypt the message. There's m symbols in it, right? So you apply this m times, presuming that modular arithmetic like this takes constant time, because it's a constant there. You have to apply this b many times, right? At least b, right? Technically speaking, I could just go like b minus 1 here, right? So I apply big O of m operations b times, so that's still big O of m because b is a constant. So this means that this is really a fast way to check this out. Now, the question of detecting if that is in fact the plain text you're desiring, that requires a little bit more work. I won't talk so much about that. I'm mostly thinking about this from a cryptanalyst standpoint. So they'll just look at the text and say, okay, well, this looks kind of like this, this, and this. So I'm going to put this in my list of candidates to look at. And then, okay, now I got my key. I got to figure out what the key is and go through that step. Automatically detecting it, you might use frequency analysis, for example. Look at the frequency of the letters. There's other tools out there that I'm not going to discuss here, but most certainly for us, when we're talking about classic cryptography like this, it'll be the case that it's very much you look at it with your eyes. That's at least a scenario I'll be coming up with. But yeah, hopefully you got some fun party tricks. But that's everything I have here. But please just remember, just the key space being large doesn't mean that it is secure. There's two elements of this. First, we want to make it so it's easy to encrypt and decrypt, but to figure out what K is that is used for the encryption and decryption, we don't want it to be easy to compute that. Because here it's fairly easy to figure it out, right? You just try out all of them and see which one makes sense, and it gives you right away the plain text for a given key. That's terrible. At least in the framework we've discussed here. But I don't see any questions, so I think this is an excellent place for us to stop for today. So just as a reminder, if you want access to the notes from today's lecture, please consider supporting at patreon.com/pagewizard. At the supporter access tier and above, you'll get access to today's notes. It'll be available later today. And for my supporters, I want to say especially thank you for making this lecture possible. This was actually a request from one of my patrons, so if you want to suggest topics, this is one excellent way to do that. So if people are interested in more about cryptography, let me know. We'll talk more about cryptography. I had to lay out the basics here before we can get into some more interesting things. Likely what I would do if I was proceeding with this topic would probably be more classic ciphers like this. Probably the more natural ones to try out next are affine ciphers, affine cipher, I'm just having a mouthful. Affine ciphers, substitution ciphers, permutation ciphers, like such as things like the Hill cipher. Vigenère cipher, that's another one. Then you talk about your friend like RSA, AES. But a lot of those require some more of that M word, the mayonnaise and mustard, especially the last couple I mentioned. So I might have to do some more lectures on topics around prime numbers, modular arithmetic like we talked about here, and so on. So I'll say thank you so much for coming on by. If you're watching this in the future, thank you for sticking on. We had ourselves a blast on over here. Hopefully you found some of the stuff we had fun with here, like our cipher over here, like our Caesar cipher. Remember, try it out with your friends. If you want to, I encourage you to try using a different value for K. But like we talked about, it's a fairly basic and easy to compute cipher, but it's also easy to break. So I'll say thank you so much for coming and joining the fun, and have yourself a beautiful day. I'll see you later.